afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Developmental Supervision to Support Conscious Discipline Implementation webinar. This is Monique Wilkinson, and I will be your presenter for this webinar. Our webinar today will be presented for roughly 30 minutes. There will be opportunities for you to actively contribute your ideas and give feedback. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be available in the upcoming days to view on the Institute of Excellence website, and you'll get that information at the end of our session. Also at the end of our webinar, there is going to be a question and answer session where you will have an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have. So let's get started. Let's briefly explore our Adobe Connect screen. There's a toolbar located at the top left side of your screen where you'll see the Adobe icon meeting next to it, and then there will be some other icons, and then you will see an icon of a person with a raised hand. That is your status tool, and there's a little arrow next to it where you can click to see what options are available to you. If you have a question at some point during the webinar, you can click raise hand and myself or my trusty assistant will address the question. There's also other options to agree or disagree with what's being said, to adjust your volume, request to speed up or slow down, etc. So feel free to use your status tool at any time. On the right side of your screen, there is a list of participants. Underneath in the Files section, there is a document for you to download. It is the Conscious Discipline Tag Coaching Method form. And then on the bottom right is the chat pod, which we will use to communicate with myself or any other participants during the webinar. And most of you, it looks as if you've found it already. You've all typed in hello and I can hear you. So if you have anything else to contribute, please type your comments into that chat bar at the bottom right of your screen. So here's our agenda for this afternoon. Goals of developmental supervision, reviewing the Readiness for Change Continuum, and documenting and supporting growth. The content of this webinar may be familiar to you as it reviews some of the key points of developmental supervision that were covered in HEO 0254, Developmental Supervision for Center Leaders. Many of you took that course with us last year. We will review the Readiness for Change Continuum and connect it to Conscious Discipline's recommendations for working with teachers at different stages of their own conscious discipline journey. So let's take a moment to reflect on our prior knowledge of the topic. What is developmental supervision? Please take a moment to type your response into the chat pod. What is developmental supervision? Some responses will be coming in just a moment. We have a couple of people still typing. Okay, Allie from Opportunity says support from a supervisor that encourages development of a particular skill. Alethea says supervising others in a way that lends itself to growth for an individual as opposed to just giving feedback. Both of those responses are correct. Developmental supervision is a way to support a teacher or another staff member that supports growth. Jeanette is also remembering professional growth. Let's just take a few more seconds on this question before we move on. Okay, you're welcome to continue typing in your responses to the question, and we'll go back and address them as they come up. Here we have a quote about the goal of developmental supervision. The important points to remember about developmental supervision are that it is a formative rather than evaluative process that helps teachers become reflective, autonomous, and proactive in their professional growth in order to provide the best possible early care and educational experiences for children. But this happens over time through many opportunities for reflection, both individually and with others. Developmental supervision assumes that teachers are unique learners with different needs, expectations, and concerns, and they need to be supervised in qualitatively different ways. Just like children need their teachers to meet them where they are developmentally, our teachers need that kind of supervision as well. Developmental supervision helps teachers engage in identifying and solving their own concerns and problems, and it empowers them by focusing on their strengths and their insights into their own thinking processes, which reminds us that developmental supervision is not about finding fault or fixing mistakes or assessing blame when things are not going well. If you completed the Developmental Supervision for Center Leaders course, you will remember this Readiness Continuum from Teachstone. It's a guide to assessing a teacher's readiness for change in practices based on how they respond to constructive feedback. The continuum describes 3 categories of teachers and their reactions to constructive feedback. Teachers who are not ready for change are either completely unaware that a problem exists, or they disagree with the constructive feedback they receive and believe that their practices are still best. What they need is to learn about the desired improvements or changes and why they are important. Teachers that are on the fence realize that there is a problem in the classroom, but they often blame others and circumstances. They need help in becoming reflective and distinguishing between their current behaviors and the desired behaviors. And teachers who are ready to change accept constructive feedback and are looking for answers to make improvements to their practices. They need support taking action to implement changes. So Conscious Discipline's Conscious Coaching Guide aligns closely with the concept of developmental supervision and the readiness continuum that we just reviewed. Its philosophy is that the support offered to a teacher is individualized and depends on each teacher's place in their own conscious discipline journey. And the ultimate outcome of conscious disciplines coaching is that a teacher reflects without judgment before, during, and after interactions with children and uses that reflection to improve practices. Conscious Disciplines Coaching Continuum moves from a teacher who interacts with children in an unconscious manner to a teacher who is consistently reflective and ready to implement new skills and structures. We are going to see Conscious Discipline's coaching recommendations for each type of teacher on the following slides. The strategies that are recommended by Conscious Discipline to work with teachers at different readiness levels parallel those that are recommended by Teachstone in the Readiness Continuum. And as we're moving forward, remember that in the chat pod on the right, if you have any questions that come up, please feel free to type them in. So the first type of teacher in Conscious Discipline's coaching guide is the unconscious and unaware teacher, which parallels the not ready teacher. A teacher in the unconscious or unaware stage tends to like external controls and scripted, standardized curriculum and assessments. This inhibits noticing and being present in the moment and inhibits building connections through relationship-based teaching. This teacher needs concrete examples and practice and frequent visits to build rapport. They should also be encouraged to visit other classrooms to see Conscious Discipline in action. A teacher in the knowing-doing gap parallels the on-the-fence teacher. This teacher can tell you all about Conscious Discipline, but upon observation, her practices are inconsistent. This teacher might lack internal motivation to change or may fear the results of trying new things. This teacher needs noticing of her strengths and small short-term steps to take that will yield results and provide that motivation for reflection and inspiration to continue improving. An action teacher parallels the ready-do teacher and is willing to learn and grow, but tends to focus more on his or her mistakes. They reflect after an interaction or a ritual or a routine, but not before or during. This teacher is ready for a strong mentor to help reframe negative perceptions of his or her practices into positive ones and develop more complete reflection abilities and make plans to fully implement new skills. So here's an opportunity to reflect and interact with the rest of the group. Can any of you readily identify staff members who are at different places on the continuum? And what are your initial thoughts about strategies to use with these teachers? Take a couple of minutes to reflect and type in your response. Looks like we have a lot of people reflecting and typing right now. Of course, it would be normal for there to be staff members at every place on the continuum in a center, because everyone is in their own place in their professional development. So Kathleen has someone that seems to be in that knowing-doing gap. They know the answers, but they don't practice consistently. So your solution was to model and partner her with a seasoned teacher for the book study. That would be helpful. Yes, on the CDAT team, there would definitely be members of your team in all different places depending on their experiences and their amount of time in the profession. Alethea is seeing people at one end of the spectrum or the other, but not so much in the middle. Okay, sharing the continuum as a conversation starter. Interesting. Using the framework to start a conversation about professional development. Okay. Lots of good ideas and reflection on who you have working for you. And Allie's going to spend some time reflecting on her staff and finding out who is in what place on the continuum and then brainstorming strategies to use with each person. Okay, we'll take another minute on this slide before we move on. Observation is the key to everything. So observing in the pilot classrooms like Kathleen is doing is a great place to start. Okay, so the ultimate goal of developmental supervision, conscious discipline coaching, and class coaching is a fully reflective practitioner, one who can look at all parts of his or her interactions and practices objectively, and then use those reflections to understand children and themselves better, to see what's working and what can be changed or improved. The objectivity of reflection is absolutely critical, because if teachers are judging themselves or judging the children, then the reflections will be negative or blaming, which doesn't support growth or change. The lens used for observation visits and reflections are the key to maintaining that objectivity, whether it's a conscious discipline rubric or a class manual or dimensions guide, or even the thinking lens from the reflective practice course. The lens chosen at the pre-observation conference provides that non-judgmental framework to view one's practices and children's behavior to support new understandings that lead to growth. The results of a teacher's individual reflection and the reflective feedback conversation afterwards can be used in many ways. All the information collected during an observation visit and the reflections and discussions afterwards should be used as a basis for further observation and feedback to support and document continuous growth. The more opportunities teachers have to reflect on their practices and receive feedback from a trusted and supportive observer, the more learning and growth is accomplished. In the observation feedback course, the observation planning form, which you see on the left side of your slide, was introduced. This form documents the pre-observation conference and provides space for post-observation reflection. This form can be used for an observation with any lens, whether it's class or conscious discipline, the standards, anything. In conscious discipline, the noticing and tag forms are used to document a teacher's strengths and areas or skills to add or grow. And the tag form is available for download on the right side of your screen in the File section. These reflections and documentations can be used to create an individual learning plan to map out long-term professional development goals and objectives for a single teacher, and any teacher goals for learning and improvement can be documented as a component of a Strong Mind Center's Quality Improvement Plan, or QIP, on WELS. So we're going to start to wrap up, but we'd like to give you another opportunity to interact and reflect and share your ideas about what main ideas that you're taking away from this webinar and what you think some of your next steps are going to be. So go ahead and reflect on that, and again, type your responses into the chat pod. What are you taking away, and what are your next steps? I'm looking forward to all the responses that are being typed right now. So Alethea, as you're in your position as executive director, you get to have now a conversation with all of your directors and get them on board with this information to see if they can start identifying where their staff members are, as well as themselves. And that's important because even our directors, even though they're all leaders of a group, they're in their own places developmentally when it comes to conscious discipline and implementation. So Kathleen, you've been finding that your observations are very helpful with both class and conscious discipline, and it's amazing how much the two of them overlap, and talking about one can lead to conversations about another one, and all the concepts fit. And Allie, you're absolutely right. The key to making this work is accurately identifying where each staff member is in their professional development and on their journey, and really tailoring your support to meet their individual needs. And Sue Haley's going to be working on identifying the staff members and figuring out what they need to bring them on board with the conscious discipline journey. Got a couple more responses coming in. Okay, we'll take one more minute on this particular slide. And Catherine is extolling the virtues of the tag form for personal growth, and you're going to introduce it to your entire center. That's a great idea, because no matter where somebody is in their conscious discipline journey, everybody has something that they're good at that they can teach others, and everybody has something that they're ready to try and add, and everybody has a place where they can grow. Thank you for your responses, everybody. So now it's our question and answer time, but before we get to that, we want to remind you to be on the lookout for an invitation to other upcoming webinars in this series, observation feedback to support conscious discipline, and reflective practice to support conscious discipline. The next webinar in our series will be the observation feedback to support conscious discipline, and that will be on Tuesday, February 28th at the same time at 1 p.m. And now we'd like to open it up to questions. Does anyone have any questions about the content we've covered today that either myself or one of the members of our audience could address? Looks like so far no one has any questions. We would also like your feedback on this webinar. We'd like to know whether or not it was helpful and what about the webinar could be improved. Please feel free to be honest. We want to make these webinars informative and convenient and helpful for all of you. So any feedback you have for us about our webinars, please feel free to type into the chat pod and let us know. Everyone must be pretty happy, which is good news. We love you too, Allie. Glad to hear that the length of time was perfect. And reflection and reviewing content that we've covered in previous courses is always helpful, whether or not we're a director or a teacher or some of our Institute of Excellence CD partners. Okay, as we're wrapping up today, we just want to let you know that you'll all be receiving a follow-up email with the link to view today's recorded webinar. We thank you very much for joining us today, and if you have any questions about the developmental supervision process or about conscious discipline support, please contact your Institute of Excellence Conscious Discipline partner. And we thank you for joining us today. Thank you very much and have a wonderful afternoon.